Okay, so a warm welcome to everybody here in Effra Space, and also to those of you who are tuning in to this recorded evening. So this is the first night of a new series or a new evening for Brixton Triratna, and it's Wednesday nights, and it's called Dharma Nights. And Dharma, I'll just explain what Dharma means, because this evening, first of all, is very welcome. We're very much wanting to welcome newcomers to it. And I'll explain some of the meanings of Dharma. So Dharma in Buddhism can mean reality or the truth. But for the series purposes, Dharma also means the teachings of the Buddha, what the Buddha taught about the truth. And so I said we'd really love to have newcomers join us. We're going to be exploring the Dharma from the perspective to make it accessible to people new to Buddhism. But also, if you're experienced in Buddhism, there's going over these teachings. As Buddhists, we go over these teachings again and again. They're very profound teachings, and it's almost you spiral around them in time. And I've been a Buddhist for many years, and I keep coming back to these teachings, and I will keep coming back to these teachings. So we're hoping to welcome people of all levels to these classes. And we're going to start with a teaching of the Buddha known as the Four Noble Truths. And it's actually the first teaching of the Buddha after he gained enlightenment. And it's a universal teaching. It's universal to all traditions of Buddhism. So there have been 2,500 years since the Buddha taught this, and many different directions Buddhism has gone to. But this teaching is universal in all schools of Buddhism. And the first noble truth starts with the key problem that life contains suffering, that there is suffering in life. And not only this truth not only explores that, but also what do we mean by suffering? And this first truth contains a story. So the story is the story of a young man, the Buddha before he became the Buddha. He was called Gautama, and again he lived over 2,500 years ago, and this young man grew up with everything that money could buy, and like all youngsters growing up, even though he was very sheltered, he started taking in the realities of life, the fact that humans are subject to falling ill, humans are subject to dying, and many humans suffer old age. He also took in, as many young people do, the sufferings of, out in the world, of conflict, fear, hatred. In one of his autobiographical segments that survives today, he even describes his dismay in looking around at the world and all the conflict, and describing it as fish kind of in too shallow water. So all that kind of desperation and conflict. So there was a lot of ways that the young Gautama, young Buddha, took in suffering. And unlike many of us, his decision wasn't to, he decided to turn towards that suffering. And rather than, just getting on with life, getting on with the good things in life, and I guess moving out towards what the world could offer, he renounced everything he had. And he set off to find an answer to this issue of human suffering. And he went forth into what's known as the homeless life. So he followed the path of the spiritual, well, the spiritual culture at that time. So there were many people wandering, looking for spiritual teachers, looking to make spiritual progress, and it involved a complete renunciation of the material things that the world could offer. And so he called this search the noble quest. And it ultimately led him to gaining what's known as full imperfect enlightenment, freeing himself from the suffering that humans are subject to. And he became an extraordinary teacher, and gave teachings that have helped countless others over thousands of years to also liberate themselves from this fact and truth of suffering in human existence. And these Four Noble Truths are set out in a particular sequence. So it follows the pattern of a medical diagnosis at the time. And I was thinking at the moment we're quite preoccupied with illness and disease and finding an answer, finding a cause and a cure to this current pandemic. And this formula, the Four Noble Truths, well, it sets out suffering as the disease, and then it moves on to the cause, and the cause is craving. And then there's the cure, that there is a cure. That's the third truth. And the fourth truth is the prescription, the Noble Eightfold Path, which we will be moving on to explore in the next few weeks. But tonight we're just going to stay with the first two truths. So the first truth of the fact of suffering and the cause of suffering, craving. So the word for suffering in Buddhism is Dukkha. And so this shorthand suffering, it has many, many nuances in terms of what the Buddha meant, because Dukkha actually literally means ill-fitting wheel. So in a sense, it's more subtle than suffering. It's this kind of unsatisfactoriness, never quite getting everything down perfectly the way we want. You know, much as we strive, there's always this little niggle. So, and there are many types of that kind of unsatisfactoriness. So there's not getting what we want, getting what we don't want, the fact that life is continually changing. So we think we have things down pat, and then this kind of slipping away. We're aware of change. There's also what's known as Dukkha, just those facts of existence that we will die, you know, the bodily suffering, and our attachments and identification to the body. And well, you could spend a lifetime exploring all the nuances of Dukkha. But so I'm just giving a few headlines, and then maybe Viryanaga will unpack that a bit more. I would just like to bring in the flip side of suffering and unsatisfactoriness, and that is happiness. So what is happiness? I think we could see happiness as getting as much pleasure as we can. I think there's that side, but is that true happiness? And in Buddhism, there's a great stress on the spiritual quality of contentment, which is a very, very high attainment. Actually, when you think about it, to be completely content. And that very much marries up with this unsatisfactoriness. And that takes us to the second noble truth, which is the cause of this unsatisfactoriness and suffering, is craving. And that word craving, again, is a shorthand for this vast spectrum of things. And I guess it's an umbrella term for aversion, pushing away what we don't want, grasping, holding on to what we want, this delusion that somehow by doing that, that's going to make us happy. And it's the very enemy of happiness, really, of contentment, craving. But we're very hard. We have quite a hard drive and strong habits and tendencies that go that way. And it's not that desire is bad. We can have healthy desire. We have genuine needs. We have desires for things that are very, very good, healthy desires. It's the seizing on to things out in the world that can't really meet those needs, that can't really fulfill us. And we tend to do that again and again. And we get into these habits which turn into being quite addictive. And then that addiction leads to a lot of negative mental states, a lot of animosity towards anything that gets in the way. So that's one area where it can just lead us to deep unhappiness. And I'll just say one last thing before I turn over to Viranaga. It is quite something, isn't it, to think that, we've got this fact of suffering, and then there's this one answer, the cause, craving. And I think when I first heard this, I thought, oh, well, I don't really have any strong addictions. It doesn't, how does that marry up with suffering? How does it really add up? And I think, with practice, we get, more and more deeper understanding of what that means and how it marries up.
I mean, I thought that I really enjoyed that in a way. I really liked how you kind of drew out those different aspects of dukkha, because I've heard, people, one criticism of Buddhism is it feels a bit nihilistic. It feels a bbit all about doom and gloom and suffering and pain in a way. But of course, that word dukkha is so significant, isn't it? And the reason why we often don't translate it is it's so rich with meaning. Even just unsatisfactoriness, unhappiness, the ill-fitting will, in a way, it's just a bit bumpy.
Yes. Yeah, and the flip side is that Buddha was seeking what makes us happy. So it isn't all doom and gloom. It's just, what's keeping us from being truly happy? And what is true happiness? Do we really know what makes us truly happy?
It's sort of interesting. I was thinking a lot today that, we can think a lot in abstract terms, but you only have to look a little bit at your experience, don't you, to find out how sort of unsatisfied you feel. I mean, I just think about the idea of going into some sort of more tighter lockdown again, and how that's going to will prevent me doing the things I like, and just noticing that little kind of, oh, I don't want that, I don't want that, and there being that kind of, unsatisfactoriness or even unhappiness that arises out of that.
And I guess related to that too is, I asked, well, was that something that really made me happy, or was that just a habitual pleasure? And there were a lot of things I thought I couldn't do without. And actually I was much happier with a simpler life. And I was amazed at the things I didn't miss, actually, that I thought were, you know, some of the pleasures that were making life worthwhile in some ways.
I mean, that's really good, isn't it? Because we often think that often we just don't want change, isn't it? I mean, often for us, that kind of, well, speaking for myself in a way, like we've got, however our life looks, it just kind of, we want it to stay the same way. And so when things change, as they inevitably do, there's that discomfort with that lurching, which causes me sort of suffering. But you're right, quite often it doesn't really matter. Like quite quickly you get used to it, or you realise you didn't need it in the first place, or whatever. But there's that attachment to having things the same way, I guess.
That's right.
You know,
which is a type of craving.
Yeah.
You know, that cravings are quite subtle. You know, the more you look at it, it's.
I mean, just like there's, you know, quite a few of my friends are unwell at the moment in the house with various things, you know, and just sort of just watching. You know, I feel sorry for them, but you know, they're in various types of ill repair and pain and so on, and just they clearly want to be out of that. But even that is that kind of it feels a bit callous to call it craving in a way, because in a certain way you can't do much about it.
Sure,
but it, you know, you just naturally don't want to be in that pain.
Exactly.
You know? And that's the thing, isn't it? That attachment to it is the problem.
Yes, I mean, it's the, well, we can't change the suffering of physical pain, but there's what the Buddha called the second arrow, which is that we add on to that bodily suffering by craving something else, you know, by, you know, I mean, if I have something like that, I'll acknowledge I really don't want it. You know, it's painful, I don't want it, but that helps me just be in that pain rather than doing a million things to distract myself from the fact that, you know, I've got that physical pain. Yeah.
And I guess, you know, I discovered a little while ago that the opposite of dukkha in Sanskrit, isn't it, or Pali, I always get mixed up, but is sukha.
Sukha, that's
which,
right.
You know, which means kind of sweet or kind of like pleasurable or
and blissful.
Yeah.
So sukha and dukkha.
Yeah, which is very nice, isn't it? Which I think is
right.
I think that's where the word sugar comes from. I think the root is the same.
Yeah.
So I quite like thinking of it as like that in a way. You know, it's like you've got those two poles, but also one can have that kind of attachment to the pleasure as well, can't they?
Yes.
You know, like you know, it kind of I guess in the same way as we, like you said, we don't want pain. We often want pleasure, or we can go around life thinking, just trying to get as much pleasure as possible in a way. And you know, nothing wrong with pleasure, is there? It's like fine. But if you just keep wanting it, you know, firstly you don't get so much pleasure out of it.
That's right.
But also you start to then really almost get addicted to it.
You get hooked to it, kind of. You know, I'm quite a pleasure person myself. You know, I mean, I often observe it when I'm eating because I'm quite a foodie, and what's going on in my head is, how can I? This is delicious. How can I get more of it? And this is all from me. This is me and mine. So that's another kind of craving, that we're just, this is for me. This is mine. I want more of it. And I notice somewhere in my body I'm tensing. And then when I just tune into, no, this is just pleasure. It's not my pleasure. It's anybody's, you know, it's pleasure. And I could even just send it, you know, wish all beings could enjoy it. You know, it's just simple enjoyment. I enjoy it much more. But I've got an ingrained habit to, you know, get more, you know, this is wonderful, how do I get more? You know? And
you can sort of be doing that while you're eating the first
That's
portion,
right,
can't
exactly.
You know, you're not actually enjoying what you're eating.
Yes, but we could do that with sunsets, you know, any kind of experience.
That's very good. I wondered if I also just could talk about, or a little bit I'm interested in, I'll see what you think about it, is you know, in a way that seeking of pleasure makes sense if there isn't a kind of way out, you know. I mean, we'll talk more, well, we won't, but two of our other teachers will talk about that next week. the pathway out in a way. But, you know, given that if you think that life is just kind of unsatisfactoriness, you may as well get as much pleasure as possible.
Yes, that's right.
But if you kind of believe there's a kind of way out of that,
and the better pleasure.
And that's right.
That's like a carrot.
Yeah.
Yes.
That there is satisfaction to be found. There is contentment to be found.
Yes.
Then it's worth pursuing that, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, it's very starkly illustrated for me by my father, by my dad, who he's got quite a sort of fatalistic kind of idea. He definitely believes in the First Noble Truth. So I often say he's half a Buddhist. Like, he sort of believes that life is a bit painful and, you know, there's a lot of suffering, and he's completely with me up until that point. And then the idea that there's something beyond that is kind of, you know, he's not up for that. So I always say he's half a Buddhist, which he finds very, very amusing. But I think, you know, in a certain way that is quite narrow. You know, that feels unnecessarily constraining in a way. Like, why only settle for those kind of sort of easy, you know, attainable, transient pleasures when there's potentially something more out there.
Something that is much more secure than what we're trying to grasp onto out in the material world or the mundane world. And I guess as Buddhists we have you have increasing faith in it the more you practice. That there is something much better, something far more pleasurable and that makes you truly happy. You know, it's true happiness, true meaning. And so that, you know, that it takes time. But I think that's why we often come across very joyful Buddhists. You know, that far from being a pessimistic religion, there's so much spiritual joy that comes out of practicing what the Buddha taught in these truths. Yeah.